Question 1. Which of the following is the primary meaning of the word nature as it's used in this passage? So the first place we see the word nature in this passage is right here in the beginning in lines 5 and 6, when Cyril is trying to get Vivian to go and lie on the grass and smoke cigarettes and enjoy nature. So what does Cyril mean by that? Well, he says that the air is exquisite and that there is a mist upon the woods, and he wants to lie on the grass. And then Vivian's response is that he's lost the faculty to enjoy nature. And down here a little further, he says that nature has good intentions, but she cannot carry them out. When I look at a landscape, I cannot help but see all its defects. Then Vivian further complains that nature is so uncomfortable. Grass is hard and lumpy and full of dreadful black insects. And then he says that nature is so indifferent, and his support for this is that when he's walking in the park, he feels that he is no more to nature than cattle or burdock blooming in the ditch. So based on this, we can see that the best answer is C, the physical landscape. None of these other responses are supported by the passage at all, so we can eliminate them all. C, the physical landscape, is the only supportable response. Question 2. Vivian's first words, enjoy nature, I am glad to say that I have entirely lost that faculty, are surprising because Vivian, what? A, prevents Cyril from finishing his thought. There's no reason to think that Cyril doesn't finish his thought here, even if that would in some way be surprising. Cyril suggests that they go lie on the grass, smoke cigarettes, and enjoy nature, and we don't have any indication that he was going to say anything further before Vivian replies, so A is not a supportable answer. B implies that enjoying nature and smoking are not incongruous. Incongruous means not in harmony with something else or not in keeping with something else. We might think that smoking and enjoying nature are incongruous, and Vivian might disagree with us, but we have no way of knowing because there's nothing here to indicate what Vivian thinks about smoking. He only talks about nature and doesn't imply anything about smoking whatsoever. So this answer, like the last one, can't be supported by the passage. Cross it out. C thinks he has lost something that he obviously still possesses. What Vivian says that he lost is the faculty to enjoy nature. Faculty is the means or ability. Based on the way he talks about nature throughout the passage, Vivian really doesn't enjoy nature, so we have no reason to believe that he's mistaken and still possesses the faculty or is still able to enjoy it. So this answer, like the last two, cannot be supported by the passage, and we can eliminate it. D is not responding to Cyril's remark. Well, let's look. Cyril says, let's go enjoy nature. And the first words out of Vivian's mouth are, enjoy nature. Then he says that he has lost the faculty to do that. It certainly sounds like a response to Cyril's remark, so this answer is clearly contradicted by the passage. Let's get rid of it. E claims to enjoy having lost a capacity to enjoy. This makes sense. Here, in response to Cyril's invitation to go enjoy nature, Vivian says that he is glad that he has lost that faculty. And faculty here means an inherent mental or physical power. And capacity here means close to the same thing. It's the ability or power to do or experience or understand something. So yes, Vivian claims to be glad to have lost the capacity or faculty to enjoy nature. And if you're glad to do something, you can be said to enjoy doing it. So E is a good answer. Question 3. From the context, the reader can infer that Morris's poorest workman in line 31 is what? A furniture craftsman. If we look at the context of these lines, we see that Vivian is complaining about how uncomfortable nature is. Cyril has just told him that he wants to lie in the grass, and Vivian responds that grass is hard and lumpy and full of black insects. And then he goes on to say that Morris's poorest workman could make a more comfortable seat than all of nature can. Someone who makes a seat, something to sit in or lie down on, could certainly be a furniture craftsman, so this answer fits well with the context. Taking a quick look at the rest of the answers, we see that these don't really fit because none of these people would be making a seat. B, a gardener. No, a gardener wouldn't make a seat, so cross out B. C, a tailor. A tailor is someone who makes or alters clothing, so this doesn't really fit. Cross out C. D, an agricultural laborer. Agriculture is the growing of crops, and someone who grows crops wouldn't be making comfortable seats, so cross out D. E, an impoverished artist, and this doesn't make sense either. An artist isn't someone who would make a seat. So the only answer that fits is A, a furniture craftsman. Question 4. Vivian probably calls the quotation in lines 33, 34, vilely phrased, line 35, because he what? And the lines in question read, nature pales before the furniture of the street which from Oxford has borrowed its name, as the poet you love so much once vilely phrased it. Vilely here means something like wretchedly bad, and phrased here means put into words. So Vivian is saying that the way the poet has put this idea into words when he says the street from which Oxford has borrowed its name is wretchedly bad. Now, vile can also mean something harsher, like morally depraved, but consider the context when you're thinking about the way he's using this word. He's talking about how something is phrased or put into words. The way you choose to word something can't really be morally depraved, so Vivian speaking about the way this poet puts something into words as vile can be seen as a bit of overstatement or hyperbole. And what he's really getting at is that this is, in some sense, a terrible way to phrase this idea. And now let's look at the answer choices. A, knows that the street did not borrow its name from Oxford University. Whether the street did or didn't borrow its name from Oxford University doesn't affect whether or not the way the poet put his idea into words is vile. If the poet was lying about it, maybe Vivian might think that lying is vile, but he wouldn't have said that the way the poet phrased it or the way he says it is vile. Furthermore, we can't tell what Vivian knows or doesn't know about whether the street really borrowed the name from Oxford or not, so we can't tell just from this if he's accusing the poet of lying. So this answer doesn't fit the context and the information that we have in the passage. Let's keep looking. Believes that the furniture sold in Oxford Street stores is too shabby for his taste. Vivian is talking about how something is put into words. He isn't saying anything derogatory about furniture, but rather about the way something is phrased or put into words. So this isn't supportable, and we can eliminate it. C, sees in it contradictions of his ideas about art and nature. If you don't know which poet Vivian is talking about, this answer won't tempt you, which is good because it shouldn't. In this particular line, the street from which Oxford has borrowed its name, we don't get anything at all about art and nature, so it's clear that this answer can't be supported. However, if you happen to know that this quotation is from a William Wordsworth poem, and that William Wordsworth is one of the poets of the Romantic movement, and if you've realized that what Vivian is saying here is opposite to and opposed to the Romantic ideas of glorifying nature, then you might be tempted to choose C, that he sees in it contradictions of his ideas about art and nature. But remember that you're only dealing with the line in question here, the street from which Oxford has borrowed its name. In that particular line, there's nothing about art and nature, so we can't know, just from this reading, that Wordsworth expresses views that contradict Vivian's ideas about art and nature. You have to stay in the context of this question and this reading, so you can eliminate C. D, considers himself a poor judge of style. Vivian doesn't say anything negative about himself and his own taste or judgment of style here. He says that the poet Cyril Loves vilely phrases something. He is insulting Cyril's judgment on poetic style here, not his own. So D is not a supportable answer, and we can eliminate it. E considers it a pretentious and roundabout way of saying something. This is the only response that addresses the fact that Vivian describes what the poet says as vilely phrased. The way he says something is the way he phrased it. Pretentious, of course, means to try to impress by affecting greater importance or culture, etc. And to say something in a pretentious way could be considered to be phrasing it vilely. If you say something in a roundabout way, you don't get straight to the point, and it can be said that using a lot of words to say something that can be said very simply is to vilely phrase it. The poet that Vivian is criticizing, instead of simply saying the name of the street, uses a more roundabout and pretentious way to identify the street by calling it the street from which Oxford has borrowed its name. So, since this is the only answer that addresses the way something is said, this is certainly the best answer of the ones that we have here. You can eliminate the rest and choose E, considers it a pretentious and roundabout way of saying something. Question 5. Vivian's view of nature might best be described as what? So we've already seen that Vivian doesn't have a very high opinion of nature, but we'll go back over some of his statements. He says that he's glad that he's lost the faculty to enjoy nature. He says here that though people tell us that art makes us love nature, that's not his feeling. He says that his experience is that the more we study art, the less we care for nature, and that art reveals nature's lack of design, her curious crudities, her extraordinary monotony, her absolutely unfinished condition. He says that nature has good intentions, but that she cannot carry them out. He criticizes nature for being uncomfortable, saying that grass is hard and lumpy and full of dreadful black insects. He says that nature is imperfect. He calls nature indifferent and unappreciative, says that nature hates mind and that it is wearisome, and again complains that it is uncomfortable. So, with no doubt in our minds about how Vivian feels about nature, let's look at the answers. A, quasi-religious. This means resembling something that's religious. We don't get any indication that Vivian's view of nature is religious or quasi-religious. He's rather disrespectful to nature, speaking of its imperfections, talking about it as wearisome and uncomfortable. We don't get the idea that his view of nature is in any way resembling religious, so this answer can't be supported. B, animistic. This refers to the belief that plants and animals and natural objects have souls. Vivian does speak of nature as if it has personality. He refers to nature as her, and he talks about nature hating mind and being indifferent and unappreciative. So he is personifying nature as a whole, but he doesn't speak of the individual elements of nature as if they have individual souls of their own. And if we were going to say that his views of nature were animistic, we would need to have evidence of that. He would also probably be speaking more respectfully of nature if his view were animistic, since animism is a religion that not only encompasses a belief in the souls of individual elements of nature, but also a respect for those souls. So this answer is also insupportable, and we can eliminate it. C, circumspect. This means careful or wary or unwilling to take risks. If this word applies in any sense to this passage, we would have to say that Vivian's view is closer to opposite of circumspect. At least, he isn't careful about the way he speaks of nature at all. After all, he's insulting to nature. So this answer can't be supported, and we can cross it out. D, scientific. The observations that Vivian makes about nature are not particularly scientific. Nature is uncomfortable, grass is hard and lumpy and damp, insects are dreadful and black. And then he speaks of nature in this personified way, referring to nature as her and saying that nature hates mind. These are not really the kinds of descriptions or statements that someone with a really scientific view of nature would come up with. So, since we don't have any support for this answer either, we can eliminate it. E, anti-romantic. Romantic, remember, doesn't just refer to the feeling in the air when people are falling in love. When you're talking about literature, one of the defining characteristics of the Romantic movement that began in the 18th century, or Romanticism, was that it glorified nature. As a matter of fact, as we saw earlier, the poet that Vivian criticizes in line 35 is a poet of the Romantic movement. And while you don't need to know that particularly to answer this question correctly, you do need to know that Romanticism is characterized in part by a love of nature or a glorification of nature. In that sense, Vivian is definitely anti-romantic. Anti means against or in opposition to, and Vivian's view of nature is certainly in opposition to the romantic view that nature is something to be celebrated and glorified. So E, anti-romantic, is a very good answer, and it's the correct one. Question 6, in lines 49 through 54, beginning with the word thinking and ending with the word stupidity, the speaker makes use of all of the following except what? Remember that this is an except question, so you're looking for which of these answers does not apply to these lines. So let's read through those lines. Thinking is the most unhealthy thing in the world, and people die of it just as they die of any other disease. Fortunately, in England at any rate, thought is not catching. Our splendid physique as a people is entirely due to our national stupidity. And let's look at our choices. A. Insult. Well, it's certainly insulting to say that the people of England are stupid, as he does here when he speaks of the national stupidity of the people of England. He says that in England, thought is not catching or contagious, so thinking is not something that spreads around very easily in England, and this is certainly part of the insult here as well. So we have insult, and we can eliminate A. B. Pathos. This is a quality that evokes pity or sadness. If you're being very literal, you might feel pity for the people of England if you really believe that they're all stupid, or if you really believe that people are dying of thinking, but that's not the effect that the author is going for here. This is meant to make you laugh rather than cry. There's nothing here to invoke genuine pity or sadness, so B, pathos, is a good answer. Remember that this is an accept question. C, hyperbole. This is exaggeration or overstatement. When Vivian says that thinking is the most unhealthy thing in the world and that people die of it just as they do any other disease, that is certainly hyperbole. Vivian is exaggerating here, and the author is using this overstatement for humorous effect. So we do have hyperbole, and we can cross out C. D, analogy. Yes, we just saw that thinking is compared to any other disease here, or at least death caused by thinking is compared to death caused by any other disease. So we do have an analogy, and we can eliminate D. E, irony. So Vivian seems to compliment the English people here. Our splendid physique as a people, he says, is entirely due to our national stupidity. He phrases this as if it's a compliment when in fact his intention is to be insulting. Or you might think that the speaker's intention, that is, the character Vivian's intention, is not to be insulting, but rather that he's perfectly sincere here. That's okay. You can certainly read it that way. But the author's intention, Oscar Wilde's intention, is to be insulting. So whether you think of the speaker or the author as the one intending this as an insult, it's still phrased as a compliment and intended as an insult. And that is verbal irony. So we do have irony, and we can cross out E. And the best answer is B, pathos, because we don't have any evidence of pathos in these humorous lines. Question 7. The primary rhetorical function of the sentence, fortunately in England at any rate thought is not catching, lines 51 through 53, is to what? So how does this sentence function in this passage? Our first choice is A, provide supporting evidence for a previously stated thesis. This essay, as we've seen so far, talks about nature. Vivian gives us all the reasons that he's not a fan of nature. Up to this point, everything he said has either to do strictly with the flaws in nature or an unfavorable comparison of nature to art. If we look at the sentences immediately before this sentence, we see that he says, nothing is more evident than that nature hates mind. This, of course, is a further criticism of nature, and then he goes on to offer evidence that nature hates mind by saying that thinking is the most unhealthy thing in the world and people die of it just as they die of any other disease. That's all in keeping with what he's been talking about up to this point. Then we come to the line in question. Fortunately, in England at any rate, thought is not catching. So here we have something different. Instead of insulting nature, he's insulting the people of England. So he's certainly not providing supporting evidence for a previously stated thesis. He's actually doing something much more like B, introducing a digression from the central topic. This answer is well supported by what we've just seen. Vivian is going on and on about nature and then digresses for a bit here to take a jab at the intelligence of the good citizens of England. B, introduce a digression from the central topic, is a well-supported answer. C, undermine a point previously made. Nothing up to this point is contradictory or opposed to the idea that thought is not catching in England. So Vivian is not undermining a point that he's previously made here. We can't support this answer, so cross it out. D, introduce an exception to a general rule. Again, this isn't an exception to anything that's been stated so far. Nothing that has been said up to this point would preclude the idea that thought is not catching in England, so this answer is also insupportable. E, distinguish between two categories. There are not two categories here. Up to this point, Vivian has been criticizing and insulting nature, and here, as a digression from that, he insults the intelligence or thinking of the English people. His purpose isn't to distinguish one thing from another. We don't have any language here that supports that idea at all. So E doesn't fit the passage, and the best answer is B, introduce a digression from the central topic.